Welcome back to the show, Cormac.
Thanks, Duncan. Nice to be back. It's been a while.
Exactly. Hey, last time you joined us, your primary focus was Kubernetes, but since then it seems that your focus has shifted a bit. Maybe you can elaborate on what you do these days, because maybe not all of the audience have kept up with your LinkedIn.
Geez, is it that long since I've been on the show?
Well, it was
Yeah, I
Kubernetes,
mean,
so yeah.
yeah. I suppose within the last year and a half, I've been focused on a new product that we have called Data Services Manager. And so, yeah, I guess it was Explore 2023 when I spoke with Christos about, you know, helping out and getting the product tested through the customer zero activities, but then also promoting the product through, blogging and the VMugs and all that good stuff. So anyone who's seen me at a VMug over the last year and a half, I guess the only thing I've been talking about is Data Services Manager. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been up to.
Awesome. Now that brings us to the topic of today, because that's exactly what we're going to be talking about, Data Services Manager. Now, before we actually dive into some of the details about the 2.0 release, it's probably good to explain why we invested in this space. I know we had Christos on a podcast a while back and he also dove into it, but I guess it's a nice refresher to explain some of the use cases and why we are doing this exactly.
Yeah, so that's a good point. I guess with all of the changes that have been going on recently with VMware, Broadcom, and so on, I'm sure your listeners will be well aware that there's a serious focus now on VMware Cloud Foundation, or VCF. And that is essentially to offer a full stack private cloud on premises. And we feel that in order to offer a fully fledged full stack private cloud, we need to also offer data services, just like you would get on the public cloud. And so that's essentially what Data Services Manager is all about, is to be able to offer these data services, databases as a service to begin with, but we have plans for other data services, which we can get into later on. But we essentially want to have that sort of mechanism available to our on-prem private cloud customers of VCF.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, when you look at what it actually is bringing and how it's being delivered, when we talk about this particular product, it's probably also good to understand who's going to be using it, because traditionally when I talk to our customers, I typically tend to talk to the storage administrator and the VI admin. But I'm guessing for this product that may be slightly different or maybe expanded.
Yeah, not necessarily, Dunk. So again, what we want to do with this version of Data Services Manager is essentially allow a VI admin to maintain control of the resources, of the vSphere resources, while still offering these data services. So, for example, the data services that we offer today are open source databases. So the Postgres SQLs and the MySQL databases. But what we're allowing through the DSM product is for VI administrators to carve out resources from their vSphere infrastructure and hand those resources off to whoever is consuming those databases or data services. So there are sort of guardrails that the VI admin will put in place before offering these data services. Now, it could be that a VI admin is also the creator of these data services. So it could be that a VI admin is actually going to create a database on behalf of an end user, but it also could be that the VI admin simply carves out the resources and hands it off to another persona within the organization, maybe a DBA, maybe a data administrator. And that DBA data administrator is then responsible for delivering the databases and data services to end users or developers or whoever. So there are multiple personas involved in this. Definitely the VI admin is our main focus, because we want to make sure that they have not just the ability to put guardrails around the resources, but also have the ability to see who is consuming and what is consuming those resources. So up until now, if there are databases provisioned on vSphere, typically, unless the VI admin has spent a lot of time maybe tagging or labeling those VMs, they wouldn't be able to identify. They'd just be black boxes. They're VMs, but they wouldn't really necessarily see that they're databases or data services running in those VMs. This is one of the things that DSM offers the VI admin is the visibility into those VMs, what's running on those VMs, what are the roles, like in the case of Postgres, it could be a primary DB role, it could be a replica DB role, it could be a monitor DB role. All of those things are bubbled up through the DSM mechanism. So I don't know, did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, and I also think it also immediately shows why it would be valuable for VI admins, because initially when we had a conversation with Christos, I primarily thought it would be very valuable for the database administrator or maybe the application owner, but I guess this also shows why it could be very useful for VI admins, because they get some insight in terms of what's running and where, and typically they only find out when something goes wrong. They get a mad or angry app owner on the phone who said my database isn't getting the resources they need to, and now in this case they can identify those issues maybe beforehand. Now, when Christos initially introduced DSM or Moneda to us back then, one of the things that stood out to me, some of the concepts that he was talking about kind of overlap with Kubernetes. Now, with 2.0, it seems that a lot have changed, and it seems that we're also introducing some form of Kubernetes. Maybe you can explain, what these things have to do with each other and how it actually is implemented these days, because to me, it kind of sounded confusing. So maybe you can elaborate on what we've done the last
Sure.
6 months with this release.
Yeah. So there used to be a DSM 1.x version of the product, and I may have mentioned this on the show before. That was going way back, maybe 2 years now. So that version of the product, what it used to do is it used to create virtual machines and then install containers in the virtual machines, and those containers would run the data services. So with DSM 2.0, which released, I think at the end of January this year, 2024, what we've done is we've completely re-architected the data services manager mechanism. So now what you get is a plugin into vSphere. So your very first step is you go to the vSphere client, you go to the plugin section, and you install this new DSM plugin, which also rolls out an appliance, a single OVA appliance. So that essentially is what you get when you install DSM. That then gives you a portal or a UI that you can work with, but there's also a fully fledged API, but we can come back to that. But you get your UI, and from there you can provision your data services. So for example, if I wanted to create a Postgres database, I would go into that UI, I would fill in all of the details, like which version of the Postgres engine I want to use. Do I want a standalone database? Do I want a replicated database? Which infrastructure policy? So this is going back to that guardrail mechanism that I spoke to you about. The VI admin would build an infrastructure policy, which is a guardrail around a set of resources that can be used for the data services. And so whoever that persona is, whether it's a VI admin, whether it's a DBA, or whether it's an end user of the actual data service, all three of those can use this portal to provision their data service. So then what happens is the DSM appliance behaves like a management entity. In Kubernetes speak, there is like a concept called cluster API. And cluster API is essentially Kubernetes that knows how to build other Kubernetes clusters. So we have this mechanism built into the appliance, which once you request a data service, it will stand up a Kubernetes cluster and deploy that data service onto your Kubernetes cluster for you. So there's multiple different aspects to this. In its simplest form, if we request a standalone database, then it's a single VM, which is a single Kubernetes node on which the database runs as a pod on that node. If it's replicated, it could be 3-node cluster or a 5-node cluster, and then what we have is those pods for the data service will be replicated across all those Kubernetes nodes. But the important thing here is that we consider that Kubernetes cluster to be a black box. It's not something customers need to set up. It's something that we take care of. It's something that we support. It's something that we will patch in lifecycle management. There should be no reason for the customer to have to concern themselves with any of the management that goes around that Kubernetes cluster. Make sense?
So basically, Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess that was my next question as well, because whenever Kubernetes comes into play, typically there also used to be a lot of different requirements. Things like NSX had to be set up, certain aspects of vSAN had to be set up, vSAN file services, etc. Is that also already taken care of? Because that would make a big difference, I guess.
Yeah, so there's no dependency on any of that with DSM. So from a storage perspective, DSM will deploy onto any of the vSphere storages. So it could be VMFS, vVols, vSAN, NFS. We don't care. We will support them all. Similarly, from a networking perspective, we will support standard, I shouldn't use the word standard, I mean distributed switches, but the normal vSphere distributed switches, but we will also provision onto NSX as well, NSX segments. So it doesn't really matter what the customer's infrastructure is, um, we will support both. Like I said, we're focused on the VCF platform. So whatever is supported in the VCF platform, we will run on with DSM.
Yeah, and I guess in most cases, VCF customers will also be using NSX, so that is probably most likely to be there.
Yeah, and I suppose it depends on which workload domain. I suppose, if there is NSX, it's more than likely typically going to be across all workload domains. But there may be some workload domains that just use distributed switches. But the point is that we can provision onto both.
Now, the other thing you mentioned just now, when we were talking about the automation aspect, you mentioned the API, the cluster API that is available with Kubernetes. Now, one of the personas, of course, is also the developer or potentially the app owner. Can they use the Kubernetes APIs instead of needing to use or being forced through the DSM APIs? How does that work? Is there any integration on that level?
Yeah, absolutely. And so again, that whole cluster API mechanism is, black box. So no one should need to worry about that. That's something that we're taking care of. But you're absolutely right. There's you could have developers who just need a database as part of a CI/CD pipeline as they're developing code and testing code and all of that stuff. So we have a full Kubernetes API that allows you to provision these databases, whether it's a Postgres database, whether it's a MySQL database. You can provision those just through very simple YAML manifests. So we provide a Kubernetes API endpoint that can be shared with your developers, and your developers can then run those YAML manifests, just simple kubectl commands to build out a database, scale a database, delete a database, whatever those CRUD activities are needed. Absolutely. So that was one of the things that we focused on, just to be able to consume this product in many different ways. So a lot of our vSphere admins, they may want to go through the vSphere client, use a UI, that kind of thing. Absolutely, they can do that. But also, if you have an end user or developer who wants to consume databases in a rapid fashion, they can do that through Kubernetes as well, through the Kubernetes API.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that actually opens up, in my opinion, a lot of opportunities, especially if you look at the different types of companies out there. Some standardize on VMware technology, some may standardize on the Kubernetes API, so that opens up those possibilities as well. Now, talking about VMware technologies, one of the things, of course, that we also have as part of VCF is the whole ARIA suite of products. So we have a product for logging, we have a product for monitoring, and of course, there's also a product for automation. Now, do we also integrate with DSM when it comes to the ARIA suite of products? How does that actually work for those three different options that we have: logging, monitoring, and automation?
Okay. So let's start with logging. There is a built-in mechanism that has a login. It's not login set, right? It's ARIA operations for logs or something like that. But we have that agent, that login side agent available to us. So essentially, we can ship logs from the appliance and from any of the databases that have been provisioned to LogInsight. Now we can also ship it to third parties. So if you're a third party, like a Splunk or something like that, will support syslog over TCP, we can ship the logs to the third party as well. Second, the ARIA operations, or VROps, as it's also used to be known. We can absolutely leverage the integrations think they used to be called something else, but today they're called those integrations. And there are integrations for lots of databases available. I know there's Oracle, MySQL, but we also have integrations for Postgres and MySQL in ARIA operations. So we can absolutely leverage those, and we can ship out statistics about how select statements are performing and all of that good stuff, the kind of queries that are being run, whether the queries are slow. All of those kind of things can be bubbled up into ARIA operations as well. So it doesn't really matter that the database has been provisioned by DSM. We can plug directly into ARIA operations as well. Last but not least, the ARIA automation part. So when we released the 2.0, I want to say, is it the 2.01 or 2.0 version of this, just a couple of months back, we also launched a custom resource that can be used with ARIA automation. So we have the install script, everything is there. All you do is you run this, I believe it's Python, it's written in, run this Python script, connect to your DSM, connect to your ARIA automation, build out all the components that are necessary, and within a minute or so, you now have within your service broker in ARIA automation the ability to provision databases as a service using DSM as your endpoint. So all of the stuff that you would see in the DSM UI, such as the selection of the database engine, do you want it to be replicated? Do you want to take backups? Do you want to do lifecycle management or patching or maintenance? All that kind of stuff that we have in the DSM UI can be replicated in the service broker mechanism in ARIA automation to allow whoever the end user is to be able to provision databases. And the ARIA automation, what's also nice about that, of course, is that you can have your separate projects, so you can do a sort of multi-tenancy with that then, while giving certain users aspect to certain resources on your vSphere infrastructure through the infrastructure policy mechanism, whilst giving other groups of users access to different parts of your vSphere infrastructure through, again, just using different infrastructure policies. So it's a very nice solution that we have, I think, for ARIA automation.
Yeah, and as already mentioned, it gives you options, and I think that is a good thing for our customers. Now, the one thing that you just mentioned was the aspect of backups, and I think that was probably one of the things that I appreciated most when I was watching the session that Christos hosted at Explore. He showed a demo, and he showed how easy it was with the 1.0 product to do a backup and to do a restore. Now that we've implemented Kubernetes as one of those layers in between, has that actually changed? How does that work? Or has that, evolved the mechanism that we have available for our customers?
Yeah, I think that's probably the thing we haven't touched on yet is, there's 101 ways of deploying a database onto vSphere infrastructure. What is it that DSM gives you? So for us, it's the things like the lifecycle management. So what our plan is that as we release new patches, because the whole thing is supported by VMware, including the databases. So as we release things like new patches, we'll be able to bubble those up into the DSM UI. Customers can then decide, okay, I need to apply this patch because it's a CVE security patch, so I should apply that straight away. Or is it just something that's maybe not even a hot patch? Maybe it's something that just needs to happen at some point. So we have built in a mechanism to do the automated lifecycle management of patching of the databases. We have a mechanism to do backups, like you alluded to. So what we can do is set up an automated schedule for each of the databases that we provision that will back up those databases on a regular basis. Now, for something like Postgres, we will do a full backup every week. We will do an incremental backup daily, and then we ship what are called the write-ahead logs. If you're into databases, you'll know what those are. And we'll ship those, I think, every 5 minutes, or there's a threshold as well. So if we build up a backlog of these things, it could happen before 5 minutes. But the thing about being able to back up these write-ahead logs every 5 minutes is that we essentially can do point-in-time restores. So it's not like restoring to midnight last night or last Saturday. It actually means that we can restore to a particular point in time. So we have that. We have the ability to scale up and scale out. So again, you might provision a database that's a standalone database, and then you decide, okay, I'm going to put this into production now, but I want it to be highly available. So we can scale out by just adding replicas to it. In the case of Postgres, you can go from a single node to 3 nodes to 5 nodes. And the really neat thing about this is because it's on vSphere infrastructure, we can have the DRS affinity, anti-affinity rules come into play, where we can actually place the replicas, the VMs that hold the replicas, onto different ESXi hosts in the cluster as well. So there's some nice things at play there. What else do we have in there? Obviously as well, I mentioned that we have the VROps capability or the ARIA operations capability for monitoring, but we also have some built-in monitoring into our dashboards as well for database specific stuff. So if there's any kind of deadlocks in the database or that kind of thing, we'd be able to highlight those. And of course, the alerting mechanism. If something goes wrong with the database, we want to be able to bring it to the attention of the VI admin. So we do have things that are bubbling up into the UI and the dashboard, but we also have the ability to send email notifications, or actually we have webhooks that can connect into something like Slack or your ServiceNow that will also raise alerts to say, hey, you might want to check this out. So a lot of neat features in there for sure.
Yeah, and one of the things I also noticed, and that's probably one of the things that we haven't discussed yet, is that we also have the ability to tweak some of the advanced settings. Now, I used to work at Oracle in a distant past, over 20 years ago, and I know how difficult things can get pretty quick. So I think that, as I recall, DSM can also help with that, right?
Yeah, so as you're provisioning the database, one of the options is to be able to add whatever advanced options you have. So for instance, we mentioned ARIA operations earlier, and to get the best out of the ARIA operations integrations, they want you to turn on certain tracking mechanisms so you can look at queries on tables and all of that good stuff. So those kind of things, they actually need to have some advanced settings added. So at provisioning time, you can put in any of the advanced settings that are supported for the Postgres databases or the MySQL databases that we support. And there could be other things that you might want to add in as well. But yeah, essentially anything that is supported by Postgres or MySQL, you can put into the form that we are creating or the wizard that we are using to provision that database. Just pop them in there. And of course, once the database is provisioned, you can go back and edit that. You can make changes on the fly while the database is running. Obviously, there would have to be a reload of the database take place to have the new advanced settings come into play, but you can absolutely do that.
Yeah, that sounds very useful, especially when you have hundreds of databases where you need to apply potentially one additional setting to. That could take ages in a normal world. When you use something like DSM, that makes life a lot easier, of course. Now, so far you've been talking about two particular types of databases, but if I recall, we've also announced the support for other data services as well with this release. So maybe you can elaborate on that, because I think that is something that listeners will appreciate.
Yeah. So the ones that we have in tech preview. So what we have at the moment is the ones that we support are the ones that I've mentioned. So we support Postgres, and we have 4 editions of that. Similarly with MySQL, we support the last 4 major versions of MySQL. The one that is in tech preview right now is AlloyDB. I get the name right. AlloyDB Omni from Google. And I think the Omni is the on-prem version. So they offer this in their cloud, but the Omni version of that is on-prem. And so we have the ability to provision those. We are in tech preview, and there's advanced settings to enable it, make it available, and then roll it out. And so I think the use cases, or again, the AI ML space, and in particular what's known as RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, where once you've trained your model to get the latest and greatest information, you might make it go to a database that has the latest and greatest information available. So you may have trained your model, and the model is now trained, but it may have been trained on older data. Before delivering you whatever you want out of your AI ML model, you can point it at a database to say, have a look in here and see if there's something else that might help you with your results. So the AlloyDB from Google, they have a lot of extensions within that database to allow that. And so that's one option that our customers have available. But of course, Postgres also, most of the open source databases now offer some sort of vector support. And open source Postgres, which we also support, offers the same thing. There's a PG vector extension, which will do something similar. But I guess it's a choice for customers. They can weigh up which one, best suits their needs. And with this AlloyDB Omni from Google, there's another choice there alongside the PG vector with Postgres.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it's one of those things that people will get excited about, especially as Frank Denneman is talking about it almost on every single episode he's hosting these days. So it seems to be blowing up.
Yeah, for sure. There seems to be a lot of interest, definitely.
Hey, the other thing I wanted to ask about, and that's probably one of the things that our listeners also would like to know, what about licensing? Is it included in VCF? How does that actually work?
Yeah, so DSM, the Data Services Manager, is part of the VCF suite. So it's not an add-on, it comes with VCF. So any VCF customer is entitled to use DSM. The only caveat, I guess, is support. So they can provision databases as much as they like, so the Postgres, the MySQLs, the tech previews of Alloy. We'll leave that. Let's leave Alloy to one side for the moment. But for the Postgres and MySQLs, they can provision as many as they like. The only issue arises is if they want support from VMware. So we do offer the full stack support. We do offer support for those databases, so they can come to us with Postgres or MySQL queries because we're building at the operators. We have that expertise in-house. The licensing for support comes as an add-on, and the add-on is under the Private AI Foundation add-on. So use DSM with VCF as much as you like, but if you also want support, you'll need to purchase the Private AI add-on, and it's driven by core, I believe, so per core. So depending on how many databases you wish to have support for, that will determine the licensing fee. Now, AlloyDB, because it comes from Google, you would have to go to Google to discuss with them if you wanted to use that one. I'm not sure what Google's licensing arrangement is. Customers would need to approach Google and figure that out for themselves.
Awesome. That makes sense. Well, Cormac, thanks for a fantastic episode. Do you have any famous last words or anything else you want to highlight or promote?
I would just say watch this space, because we're iterating on DSM quite regularly. We launched the 2.0 release at the end of January. We're now at 2.03. So we're bringing out almost a monthly release with some new features included. We are expecting to have a major release with, very soon, with some really exciting new features in it. And then I think watch out for Christos's session at Explore this year. He's going to have some really interesting things to talk about. Again, about our future plans. And I think by the end of this year, we should have some additional data services which our customers will be very excited about.
Awesome. Thanks.
My pleasure. Take care.
Cool. Let me click stop. Nice.